Hey crew, it's Ben, and I'm back with another Bible study. Today we will be getting back into Joshua, but before we begin, if you are unfamiliar with what we're doing here, I hold an unconventional Bible study because I hold unconventional beliefs. This is not what you're used to, and if that makes you uncomfortable, please click away. If you are curious, please start at the beginning because it is hard to keep up otherwise. Now, for those of you who have been here, we're going to dive back into Joshua. This will be Joshua 6 because we left off in Joshua 5. There's going to be a whole lot to talk about today, and I really hope that you took my advice. And if you get your feelings hurt easily, you are not here because that is the last concession that I'm going to make to that. Now, Jericho was tightly shut up because of the Israelites. No one went out, and no one came in. This explains how the entire force of the Israelites were comfortable cutting the ends of their penises off because it's a recovery time and they had to wait and they had their feast and all of these things within the sight of the walls of this place, right? But these people are terrified, so they're shut into this wall that is made up of the houses of people because this is not just a wall with the houses next to it. The house has to be part of the wall in order for Rahab to have let the spies out through a window in the wall. Like in order to get to the outside of the wall, they had to go through her house, and so her house is built like in the wall. The wall is her house. That's important. I'm hammering that for a minute. We're going to get to it in a second. And the Lord said to Yeshua, "Behold, I have delivered Jericho into your hands, along with its king and his mighty men of valor. March around the city with all the men of war, circling the city one time. Do this for 6 days. Have 7 priests carry 7 ram's horns in front of the ark. And then, on the 7th day, march around the city 7 times, while the priests blow the ram's horn. And when there is a long blast of the ram's horn, and you hear its sound, have all the people give a mighty shout. And then the wall of the city will collapse, and all your people will charge straight into the city." Now, this collapse right here has got a footnote. The footnote says, will fall flat or will just completely crumble. So the wall all the way around the city is going to fall flat. Now, are you seeing the problem already? You should be seeing the problem already. And so Yeshua, son of Nun, summoned the priests and said, "Take up the Ark of the Covenant and have 7 priests carry 7 ram's horns in front of the Ark of the Lord." And he told the people, "Advance and march around the city, with the armed troops going ahead of the Ark of the Lord." And Yeshua had spoken to the people, 7 priests carrying 7 ram's horns, before the Lord advanced, and blew the horns, and the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord followed them. And while the horns continued to sound, the armed troops marched ahead of the priests who blew the horns, and the rear guard followed the ark. But Yeshua had commanded the people, "Do not give a battle cry, or let your voice be heard. Do not let one word come out of your mouth until the day I tell you to shout, and then you are to shout." And so he had the ark of the Lord carried around the city, circling it once, and the people returned to the camp and spent the night there. Yeshua got up early the next morning, and the priests took the ark of the Lord, and the 7 priests carrying 7 ram's horns kept marching ahead of the ark of the Lord and blowing the horns. The armed troops went in front of them, and the rear guard followed the ark of the Lord, while the horns kept sounding. So, on the 2nd day, they marched around the city once and returned to the camp. They did this for 6 days. And then, on the 7th day, they got up at dawn and marched around the city 7 times in the same manner. That was the only day they circled the city 7 times. And after the 7th time around, the priest blew the horns. And Joshua commanded the people, "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city. Now the city and everything in it must be devoted to the Lord for destruction. Only Rahab the prostitute and all those with her in her house will live, because she hid the spies we sent. But keep away from the things devoted to destruction, lest you yourself be set apart for destruction. If you take any of these, you will set apart the camp of Israel for destruction and may bring disaster upon it. For all the silver and gold and all the articles of bronze and iron are holy to the Lord. They must go into his treasury." All right, so let's pause to look at geography. Right? That's one of the things we do here is we look at the actual places we're talking about because it's interesting to look at the topography. And see what they would have to do if they were going to indeed circle all the way around this city. Right? Let's say that this is the city. Let's assume that the city proper is inside of this sprawl, right? Maybe their city wasn't as large as this one, although that's improbable. It was probably pretty close to the same size. And so, well, let's close that out. And so, we're assuming that this right here is the city. They didn't build it backed up on these mountains right here. Let's get down here and look at the topography a little bit better. Like, it's kind of all brown, so it's hard to see. But this does indeed raise up, right? This is a mountain here. And honestly, if you don't have the mountaintop fortified, which would be your best option for the city, probably, right? You wouldn't want to back up to the mountain, because then an army could get up there and rain arrows and all kinds of destructive measures down upon your head. So you would be off of the mountains a little bit, so you're probably okay with that. Oh, but there's a river here, so I'm sure it's on one side of this. Well, that looks more like a seasonal canal, maybe. But they walk around this city 7 times. Now, imagine you're inside the city. Let's put ourselves in the place of Jericho for a second. And you have this city that is in this area right here. This is a fairly desolate area. This is not like the breadbasket of the Middle East, right? This is not where all the food is produced. This is not providing a surplus for the places around. This is not a highly desirable area for anybody who does not have cultural ties to it for the most part. But Israel is too big to fit here, which is where they started. They took over this side of the Jordan River, and this is all mountains, and they took over this side of the mountains and this side of the river. So they wiped out these people, and then they came up here, and they wiped out some more people up here. And now they're down here. They crossed over the Jordan into the Gilgal because they don't have room for everybody there. They've got a lot of people, so they've got to stretch. And so they come over here and they're going to take this land. We're in the mines of Jericho now, and they built their houses in such a way that they don't really have a whole lot of privacy in this area. Like, there's a lot of places you could put a house, but for some reason they thought maybe we should put our houses side by side so close together that they form a wall, and then we won't make multi-layers of this, because Rahab had a multiple layer, right? She let them out of an upper window. They had to use a rope. They couldn't just jump out the window or just walk out the window. They were at least on the second story, probably the third. This is a high wall, so it prevents attack. This is people's houses. There are windows in the wall to people's houses because it's their houses. And so you're backed up, and you're on the roof of your house watching this army invade your land and walk around your home every day silently, except for ram's horns, for 7 days, or for 6 days. And then on the 7th day, they do it for 7 times. They go around your house 7 times, blowing this horn. And when they stop, they blow one long blast, and everybody shouts, and all of your houses shatter and fall to the ground, and everybody in it dies. Because that is the reality of what would happen. If you were on top of the house, you're going to die from gravity. You're at least 30 foot in the air. That's a long way to go onto rubble. I promise me. I'm telling you. And so you're probably at least injured, most likely dead, because you were on top of these houses watching this army to see if they're about to attack. So all the army is up there, like all the defense units, the civil defense units, because they don't have an army. They're not going out invading people. These are people living in their cities, in their villages, in their homes. Always keep that in mind. You can apologize for it. You can say that they were tainted bloodlines, that they were from Cain, or they were from the Nephilim, or they had the blood of giants, or whatever you want to use to justify that. I used to do that. I used to say, well, they had the Nephilim blood, and that's why this happened. But some cases that appears to be recorded, in some cases it does not. And this is not one of the cases where this has anything to do with bloodlines. This was, we need control of this area and so we're going to take it. And we outnumber you, and so we're going to take it. Now, I am in belief that they had control of a superior technology, and that this technology allows them to manipulate electromagnetics, and part of the electromagnetics is sound. Now, if you have a device that can manipulate sound in such a way that it can hold back water, not just once but twice, or call forth water from a rock, or a myriad of other things, make a pillar of fire, right? You can manipulate the forces of nature with this technology. Why couldn't they use that to destroy the wall? Right? That's what they did, but they had to power it up somehow. They're not walking around with the tabernacle, are they? But they are walking around with some priests who are specifically designed to manipulate an energy. And they're walking around with this battery and capacitor unit that allows for the discharge through the manipulation, however it may happen to be. I have my theories. There are other theories. And so when the sound comes, they use this device, in my estimation, to amplify it and make it happen. I think what happened the first couple of times, they were seeing how much charge they could get and need, and seven's a significant number for a lot of people for a lot of reasons. It's specific for some entities for other reasons. And so it is very important to remember that Rahab, the prostitute, and all of her family were inside the houses on at least the second floor, but probably the third floor, when the entire wall, which was her house, fell down. And when the ram's horn sounded, the people shouted, and they heard the blast of the horn, and the people gave a great shout, and the wall collapsed. And then all the people charged straight into the city and captured it. At the edge of the sword they devoted to destruction everything in the city, man, woman, young and old, oxen, sheep, and donkeys. Meanwhile, Yeshua told the two men who had spied out the land, "Go into the house of the prostitute and bring her out. Bring out the woman and all who are with her, just as you promised her." And so the young spies went in and brought out Rahab and her father and mother and brothers and all who belonged to her. They brought out her whole family and settled them outside the camp of Israel. It is important to remember one thing as we go forward through this whole Bible study. He who wins writes the history. And then the Israelites burned up the city and everything in it. However, they put the silver and gold and articles of bronze and iron into the treasury of the Lord's house. And Yeshua spared Rahab the prostitute with her father's household and all who belonged to her, because she hid the men Joshua had sent to spy out Jericho. So she has lived among the Israelites to this day. At that time, Yeshua invoked this solemn oath. "Cursed before the Lord is the man who rises up and rebuilds this city Jericho. At the cost of his firstborn he will lay its foundations, and at the cost of his youngest he will set up its gates." So the Lord was with Yeshua, and his fame spread throughout the land. Okay, so they did it. They just put a whole nother city down. It's implied, but not explicitly stated, that something similar happens at Gilgal, right? The Mount of Foreskins. And now they just completely wiped out this place and burnt everything to the ground. Now, I believe that Rahab went the same route, right? Now, it's possible that they spared her section of the wall. It's possible that only a small piece of the wall fell. It's possible for a whole lot of things. But it's not possible for her to be inside the wall when the wall falls, and then her and her whole family comes out and they're perfectly fine. That's just not how that happened. They may have spared her section of the wall, but this says that the wall fell. The whole wall fell. And that they burned everything. And so there is a contradiction here. It's not the biggest one we've dealt with, but it is there. And now we're going to get into some more stuff, right? And remember that history is written by the victors. Let's get the glasses on. The Israelites, however, acted unfaithfully, according to things devoted to destruction. Achan, son of Carmi, son of Zabdi, son of Zerah, son of the tribe of Judah, took some of what was set apart. And so the anger of the Lord burned against the Israelites. Meanwhile, Yeshua sent men from Jericho to Ai. Let's talk about Ai. Ai is a Canaanite city, right? Apparently, this is Jericho. Ai is roughly here, simply because of geography and the things that will be explained later. But we see Joshua and his men camp across the valley to the north, and the only place that is really big enough for that to happen is right here, or where this city sits, because it lies between Jericho and Bethel. And I marked these out according to best guess estimates, right? Some people put Bethel here, some people put Bethel right over here. It's not that important. They're got to be right here, right? But this is the common where it is. Now, the references to Bethel and Ai being next to each other go back to Genesis. So this is a fairly good configuration estimate, but we will get into here shortly where there's another consistency error here, but we'll get into that in a little bit. Ai. This is also pronounced the same, but not the same word as the word of creation. This is the same Yahweh, however you want to say the name of God, right? This is the breath of life. But it's not the same word. That's it, right? It's not the same word, but it's pronounced the same way, depending on which pronunciation you take, right? And so I just wanted to point out that the second place that they go and the first place that they're defeated after they begin the conquest of Israel is Yah. Meanwhile, Yeshua sent men from Jericho to Yah, which is near Bethaven, to the east of Bethel, and told them, go up and spy out the land. So the men went up and spied out Ai, because this has worked so well for them before, the spying out thing. They're not supposed to just go forth and take. They're not supposed to just go and walk and do, right? The spying out thing has not caused any problems whatsoever. And on returning, they reported, there is no need to send all the people. 2,000 or 3,000 men are enough to go up and attack Ai. And since the people of Ai are so few, you need not wear out all our people there. So about 3,000 men went up, but they fled before the men of Ai. And the men of Ai struck down about 36 of them, chasing them from the gates as far as the quarries, and striking them down on the slopes. And so the hearts of the people melted and became like water. I'm going to go ahead and do this. A lot of people have not been in a situation where their life is actually on the line. I have, right? I was in the Navy and I was combat deployed twice. I never faced any direct action, but that ain't what I'm talking about. I lived a somewhat shady life. And in my somewhat shady life, I have been exposed to things quite often that most people don't have to have dealt with. I have had things placed against my head, both by myself and by other people. And so I'm fully aware of the things that go through your minds in combat situations. Let's look at this. Let's look at this in Google Earth. We're going to assume for now that this is the location that we are speaking of, right? So we are coming from Jericho, and we're going to cross up this hill country. We're going to go through the hill country, and we're going to try to take a fortified position on the top of a mountain. Now, I don't know if you've ever studied tactics at all, but that is not the optimum approach on taking anything. You have a readily available force of 40,000. That's the number we got, right? That one. Let's go back up and look at the number we got. Where was the number we got? I think it was 40,000, right? All right, let's. I'm pretty sure that 40,000 was the one. There it is, right there. About 40,000 troops. So you have a ready available force of 40,000. You have just defeated a very heavily armed city on the plains by attacking it through a demoralization attack and the destruction of its fortifications through supernatural means. So, of course, what you're going to do now is split your forces into a much smaller force, and you're going to go and try and take this fortified position on a mountaintop after traversing some rough detail with only a fraction of your force, right? Like 1%, right? That's what you, or 10%. That's what we're sending. And so that absolutely makes sense. That's absolutely a tactically sound idea. But not only do you do it, right? You go to attack this city, and people like your spies tell you, "Oh no, they ain't. They're fine. You just go and walk over them." And so you send them over there, and these people are so convinced that they're just going to walk through this that they take casualties in the number of 36 and turn tail and run. Now, having been in combat situations with people, right, associates, I can tell you that if you're dealing with associates who will turn tail and run in that situation, then you are never going to achieve your goal. I don't care what happens from then on. Like, you have the assurance of God Almighty Himself. You just watched the walls of Jericho fall, and you take 36 out of 3,000 casualties. I had to address that, right? That's a significant issue, am I right? Like, 36. And it just broke them. Like, their hearts of the people melted and became like water because they took 36 casualties. I'm taking scratches bigger than that on my eyeballs. And then Yeshua tore his clothes and fell face down before the ark of the Lord until evening, as did the elders of Israel, and they all sprinkled dust on their heads. O Lord God, Yeshua said, why did you ever bring this people across the Jordan to deliver us into the hand of the Amorites to be destroyed? If only we had been content to stay on the other side of the Jordan. O Lord, what can I say now that Israel has turned its back and run from its enemies? When the Canaanites and all who live in the land hear about this, they will surround us and wipe out our name from the earth. Then what will you do for your great name? But the Lord said to Yeshua, stand up. Why have you fallen on your face? Israel has sinned. They have transgressed against my covenant that I commanded them, and they have taken some of what was devoted to destruction. Indeed, they have stolen and lied, and they have put these things with their own possessions. And this is why the Israelites cannot stand against their enemies. They will turn their backs and run from their enemies, because they themselves have been set apart for destruction. I will no longer be with you unless you remove from among you whatever is devoted to destruction. Get up and consecrate the people, saying, consecrate yourselves for tomorrow. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Among you, O Israel, there are things devoted to destruction. You cannot stand against your enemies until you remove them. In the morning you must present yourself, tribe by tribe, and the tribe that the Lord selects shall come forward, clan by clan. And the clan that the Lord selects shall come forward, family by family. And the family that the Lord selects shall come forward, man by man. And the one who is caught with the things devoted to the Lord must be burned, along with all that belongs to him, because he transgressed the covenant of the Lord and committed an outrage in Israel. So Yeshua arose early the next morning and had Israel come forward, tribe by tribe. And the tribe of Judah was selected. He had the clans of Judah come forward, and the clan of the Zaharites was selected. He had the clan of the Zaharites come forward, and the family of Zabdi was selected. And he had the family of Zabdi come forward, man by man. And Achan, son of Carmi, son of Zabdi, son of Zerah, of the tribe of Judah, was selected. And so Joshua said to Achan, my son, give glory to the Lord, the God of Israel, and make confession to him. I urge you to tell me what you have done. Do not hide it from me." "It is true," Achan replied. "I have sinned against the Lord, the God of Israel. This is what I did. When I saw among the spoils a beautiful cloak from Shinar, 200 shekels of silver, and a bar of gold weighing 50 shekels, I coveted them and took them. They are hidden in the ground inside my tent, with the silver underneath." So let's look at these footnotes. That's 5 pounds of silver and 1.25 pounds of gold. "I coveted them, and they are hidden in the ground inside my tent, with silver underneath." So Yeshua sent messengers who ran to the tent, and there it was, hidden in his tent, with the silver underneath. They took the things from inside the tent, brought them to Yeshua and all the Israelites, and spread them out before the Lord. And then Yeshua, together with all Israel, took Achan, son of Zerah, the silver, the cloak, the bar of gold, his sons and daughters, his oxen and sheep, and tent, and everything else he owned, and brought them into the valley of Achor. "Why have you brought this trouble upon us?" said Yeshua. "Today the Lord will bring trouble upon you." And all Israel stoned him to death. And then they stoned the others and burned their bodies. And then they heaped Achan in a large pile of rocks that remains to this day. And so the Lord turned from his burning anger. Therefore that place is called the Valley of Achor to this day. Okay, so we have a couple of problems, right? The first most obvious problem is he's probably not the only one there. He is almost certainly not the only one there. But they knew he was probably talking, and somebody told them who to find. That is the most obvious solution to this. Now, it could be supernatural. I'm not dismissing that. The problem that I have here is that we were just given, before crossing the Jordan, we were given a law, and that law told us that the sins of the father would not be put upon the children. But it is, right? They could very well have stoned Achor for his problem and not put his children and all that he owned to death, and still fulfilled the law. I guess God was a little thirsty. And so, before they took Gilgal, or after they took Gilgal, and before they took Jericho, they all made a sacrifice. They made a mountain, a hill, out of a piece of flesh. And then they went and destroyed Jericho. And this time they go and they try to take Ai, and it doesn't work. But then they make a sacrifice of flesh. And all of a sudden, Yeshua gets an idea. And then the Lord says to Yeshua, "Do not be afraid or discouraged. Take the whole army with you and go up and attack Ai. See, I have delivered into your hands the king of Ai, his people, his city, and his land. You shall do to Ai and his king as you did to Jericho and his king, except that you may carry off their plunder and livestock for yourselves. Set up an ambush behind the city." And so Yeshua and the whole army set out to attack Ai. Yeshua chose 30,000 mighty men of valor and sent them out at night with these orders. Pay attention. You are to lie in ambush behind the city, not too far from it. All of you must be ready. Then I and all the troops with me will advance on the city, and they will come out against us, as they did the first time, and we will flee from them. And they will pursue us until we have drawn them away from the city, for they will say, "The Israelites are running away from us as they did before." And so, as we flee from them, you are to rise from the ambush and seize the city. For the Lord your God will deliver it into your hands. And when you have taken the city, set it on fire. Do as the Lord has commanded. See, I have given you orders. And so Yeshua sent them out, and they went to the place of ambush and lay in wait between Bethel and Ai, to the west of Ai. But Yeshua spent that night among the people. And Yeshua got up early the next morning and mobilized his men, and he and the elders of Israel marched before them up to Ai. And then all the troops who were with him marched up and approached the city. They arrived in front of Ai and camped to the north of it, with the valley between them and the city. Now, Yeshua had taken about 5,000 men and set up an ambush between Bethel and Ai, to the west of the city, so that the forces were stationed with the main camp to the north of the city, and the rear guard to the west of the city. And that night Yeshua went into the valley. And when the king of Ai saw the Israelites, he hurried out early in the morning with the men of the city to engage them in battle at an appointed place overlooking the Arabah. But he did not know that an ambush had been set up against him behind the city. And Yeshua and all Israel let themselves be beaten back before them. And they fled towards the wilderness. And then all the men of Ai were summoned to pursue them. And they followed Yeshua and were drawn away from the city. And not a man was left in Ai or Bethel who did not go out after Israel, leaving the city wide open while they pursued Israel. And then the Lord said to Joshua, "Hold out your battle lance towards Ai, for into your hand I will deliver the city." And so Yeshua held his battle lance towards Ai, and as soon as he did, the men in ambush rose quickly from their position. They rushed forward, entered the city, captured it, and immediately set it on fire. Boy, oh boy, that's a lot of fun, huh? So, we had the force of 4,000. They have taken Jericho and Gilgath, and we don't have any reports of casualties other than the flesh being cut away. And so now they have 10,000 men hidden in the wilderness to the west of Ai. They have 30,000 men, or no, they have 30,000 men hidden, and they have 5,000 men that go and array themselves for battle. And they make an agreement to have battle because they agreed on a place, right? It tells us that. They went out as was expected. They said, yes, we will meet you in honorable combat. And then, when they did so, they took all the people, all the men available to them, and they went to defend their homes from the invasion of these people who have just put two populations to the sword. Then Israel, in all its valor, runs in behind them and takes out the women and children and sets the house on fire. That's awesome. That is absolutely a stroke of genius. Like, who would think of that? What kind of a person would think, you know what we're going to do? We're going to go, we're going to lure all these men out with the promise of honorable combat. And then, not even to ambush them, but to ambush their wives and children. You're going to sweep in behind them, and you could very well pincher them, hammer and anvil, and destroy all the men. That is something you can do. You have 30,000 people attacking from the rear unsuspected. But that's not what you do. That's not what you do. That's not the honorable thing to do. Instead, the honorable thing to do is to go into the city that has been left defenseless because they are meeting you in honorable combat and set it on fire. That's absolutely the honorable thing to do. I guess they couldn't make the walls collapse. I guess that battle lance wasn't strong enough for the wall around Ai the way it was for the wall around Jericho. Maybe they couldn't march all the way around it. Maybe they couldn't get the acoustics right. I don't know what was going on. But I can tell you right now that if your God is telling you that the proper thing to do when arranged to meet in, like, I understand guerrilla warfare. I do. Like I just told you, I've been on the shady side of life. I understand being the one doing the thing, right? But this is all wrong. Like all wrong. Every single step of this has been deception, lies, and deceit, and bloodletting. And the holding out your battle lance now. What do you suppose the battle lines could be that would be visible? Right? I'm assuming that Yeshua is not on the front lines of battle facing all these men who came out to meet him. They're running away from the position, right? Let's look at the positions. Let's look at geography real quick. So, all the men of Bethel and Ai have come to the defense, right? So you're looking at a fairly significant force. The people of Israel are over this way because they are camped to the north across the valley. So they are more than likely on this plain, and they're retreating downhill through the foothills over here. So how do you think that it's possible that the people over here hiding in the wilderness, these 30,000 troops hiding, saw him raise a lance from way over here? Now, yes, I guess you could say that he raised the lance and then there was somebody over here at this point who signals somebody over here at this point who signals, but that's an awful lot of not getting seen across this valley, right, to set this up. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say that maybe there was a little fire involved. Maybe he had the ability to make fire visible, something that Israel would be, let's say, familiar with, that maybe they had been guided by before. And they saw a signal that to them was like, okay, that's it, let's go. And then they snuck into the city and they did what they did, which was set fire to an undefended city. And then they rushed forward, entered the city, captured it, and immediately set it on fire. And when the men of Ai turned and looked back, the smoke of the city was rising into the sky, and they could not escape in any direction. And the troops who had fled to the wilderness now became the pursuers. And when Yeshua saw all Israel, and when Yeshua and all Israel saw that the men in ambush had captured the city, and the smoke was rising from it, they turned around and struck down the men of Ai. Meanwhile, those in ambush came out of the city against them, and the men of Ai were trapped between the Israelite forces on both sides. So Israel struck them down until no survivor or fugitive remained. But they took the king of Ai alive and brought him to Yeshua. And when Israel had finished killing all the men of Ai who had pursued them into the field and wilderness, and when every last one of them had fallen to the sword, all the Israelites returned to Ai and put it to the sword as well. A total of 12,000 men and women fell that day, all the people of Ai. Yeshua did not draw back the hand that held his battle lance until he had devoted to destruction all who had lived in Ai. Israel took for themselves only cattle and plunder of that city, as the Lord had commanded Yeshua. And so Yeshua burned Ai, and made it a permanent heap of ruins and desolation to this day. He hung the king of Ai on a tree until evening, and at sunset Yeshua commanded that they take down the body from the tree and throw it down at the entrance of the city gate. And over it they raised a large pile of rocks, which remains to this day. Let's look at that. So, they come out to fight, the men go in and they take the city, set it on fire, and then the men see that their city is on fire, right? The men of Ai, they look and they see their city is on fire, and they're like, what the hell? And so they turn around to go back, and then they get hit from behind by these men who were fleeing from them. Let's look at these numbers real quick, though, because that makes it even more interesting. A total of 12,000 men and women fell that day. All the people of Ai. Now, we were just told that this is the people of Ai, and it's the people of Bethel, right? The men of Bethel came too. So they didn't put the women and children to death at Bethel yet, but they yeah, we'll get to that. So now they have just used a force of 40,000 people to ambush 12,000 people. I don't know that I can describe a greater act of cowardice ever in the history of ever. You're fighting men of valor who have just seen the supernatural deliverance, like even if they had not seen, which we were told they did, if they had not seen the plagues in Egypt and going across the sea and led through the desert and given the law and all of the things that happened, if you were one of the fighting force of 40,000 men of valor and you had just witnessed your God destroy the walls of this city that were thick enough to be houses because they were houses, and you go up against a force of 12,000 men and women. So you're looking at a defensive force of 6,000 tops. Okay. Now, they don't tell you that they killed children, so maybe they didn't. Right? Maybe they... No, that can't be. Is that included in the number? It doesn't say that. It says men and women. So we're going to go with men and women. Maybe the population was a little bit bigger. Maybe the women came out in defense too because it was a somewhat desperate situation. Maybe they were fighting for their very existence and their way of life in their home that they had always known, where their grandfathers and grandfather's grandfather had grown up, lived, died, and been buried. Maybe we've been on the wrong side of this conflict the whole time. Israel took for themselves only the cattle and plunder of that city, and so he burned it and made a permanent heap of ruins. And they hung the king on a a tree, until evening. He impaled the king of Ai on a pole as the footnote. And looky here, what do we have here? We've got a renewal of the covenant. How often do we have to do this? And at that time, Yeshua built an altar on Mount Ebal to the Lord, the God of Israel. Just as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded the Israelites, he built it according to what is written in the book of law of Moses, an altar of uncut stones on which no iron tool has been used. And on it they offered burnt offerings to the Lord, and they sacrificed peace offerings. And there, in the presence of the Israelites, Yeshua inscribed on the stones a copy of this law of Moses, which he had written. And all Israel, foreigners and citizens alike, with their elders, officers, and judges, stood on both sides of the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord, facing the Levitical priest who carried it. Half of the people stood on the front of Mount Gerizim, and half of them in front of Mount Ebal, as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded earlier, to bless the people of Israel. And afterward, Yeshua read aloud all the words of law, the blessings and the curses, according to all that is written in the book of the law. There was not a word of all that Moses had commanded that Yeshua failed to read before the whole assembly of Israel, including the women, the little ones, and the foreigners who lived among them. What foreigners? Y'all killed all the foreigners. There are no foreigners, right? That's literally written into your bylaws. There can be no foreigners. So, yeah. Let's talk about geography again, because this is interesting, right? From the text, what we could infer is that at that time means directly after the taking of Ai, right? That's what you would assume from this. But there's a geological problem here. This is Jericho as it is assumed to be today, right? This is literally where Jericho lies today, and it is assumed that that is where the biblical Jericho was. And here is Ai in relation to Jericho, and it is a fairly close approximation to where people consider it. And here is Bethel. But here is Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal. Now, if you're unaware, that is a significant distance, right? Let's pull out the old measuring tape. And so from Bethel to Mount Ebal is 20 miles. And if from Bethel to Ai is 4 miles, right? And then from Ai to Jericho is 13 miles. And from Jericho to Gilgal is 20 miles. I think it's fairly reasonable to assume that from Bethel, let's do it again, from Bethel to here, what is going on? Where's my measurement? Give me my measurement. Come on, Google, act right. That in this 20 miles there is somebody else to conquer. Right? That's the entirety of where I was going with that. That took much longer than it should have. This is fairly rough terrain. But if you look, right now, people live all in this area. There are habitable areas between these two spots and these two spots. We are led to believe, right, by omission, that they went from Jericho to Ai to Bethel. Now, the only way they went from Jericho to Ai to Bethel and directly into Mount Gebal and Mount Ebal and Gerizim is if we are looking at the wrong spots. If instead we look at possibly this being Jericho, this being Ai, and over here being Bethel, which is a completely off-the-wall assumption. It's a reasonable assumption that they made it here. Or if Jericho lies here, and Ai lies here, and Bethel lies here, it is a reasonable assumption that they have control of this area right then. It's not a reasonable assumption to assume that they took control of this area between here and here uncontested. So one of two things is wrong, right? Either Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim is recorded in the wrong place, or Jericho, Bethel, and Ai is recorded in the wrong place. Well, three things. Or there's a whole list of conquests that we don't get. It's one of those things. But I wanted to point it out because it absolutely makes sense. If you look down here, that they could absolutely line this, right? If the ark is here in the middle right here between these 2 points and they have people up this slope and people up this slope and one side gets the blessing and one side gets the curse, and it's funny to watch later, you'll see this. The side that gets the blessing is the side that stays true to the Lord, and the side that gets the curse is the side that ventures away from the Lord. There's not a place quite like it here, although you could make the argument for over here, coming into Bethel this way. It's not as strong or as good of an argument for the location. Personally, I believe that there was probably a lot more conquest that we're not getting, and less that we are in the wrong location. But that is a possibility, and I wanted to line it out. But he's got to renew a covenant because, that's just what we got to do. God doesn't keep his promises. All right, we're going to do the Gibeonites, and then we'll let it ride. The deceit of the Gibeonites. And now when we're talking about the Gibeonites, I don't have them marked out, right? But we are here. The Gibeonites actually live in the area of Hebron, which is a little bit farther south. They're down this way. So that also makes it a little bit harder because it says that the Gibeonites come to them here. And is that before they go up here and they take Mount Ebal? Because it's only a couple of days, and it does make a little bit of a contradiction here. When news reached all the kings west of the Jordan, those in the hill country, the foothills, and all along the coast of the Great Sea towards Lebanon, the Hittites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, they came together to wage war against Yeshua and Israel. But the people of Gibeon, having heard what Yeshua had done to Jericho and Ai, acted deceptively, and sat out as envoys, carrying on their donkeys worn-out sacks and old wineskins, cracked and mended. And they put worn, patched sandals on their feet and thread-work clothing on their bodies. And their whole supply of bread was dry and moldy. And they went to Yeshua in the camp of Gilgal and said to him and the men of Israel, "We have come from a distant land. Please make treaty with us." Wait. Where? I was wrong on that. Right? I was thinking that they came to him here at Bethel. He came to him at Gilgal. And so they conquered this and went back to Gilgal? Is that what we're saying? Or did they come before the conquering in Gilgal? It seems to be after they have, having heard what they did to Jericho and Ai. But why are they back in Gilgal? Did they retreat from Bethel? Like they should hold Bethel. Bethel has been significant to them in their own lore forever, right? That's where the Jacob's ladder was. That's where Abram was at. Like there was so much going on at Bethel. They should hold Bethel. That should be the holy place, not Gilgal. So they arrayed themselves as though they had come from far, because if you show up and you've got brand new wineskins, then it's obvious that you're close. So they took old stuff and they went as though they had been traveling, because these people are kind of ruthless. The men of Israel said to the Hivites, "Perhaps you dwell near us. How can we make a treaty with you?" "We are your servants," they said to Yeshua. And then Yeshua asked them, "Who are you and where have you come from?" "Your servants have come from a very distant land," they replied, "because of the fame of the Lord your God. And we have heard reports about him, all that he did in Egypt, and all that he did to the two kings of the Amorites beyond the Jordan, Sihon, king of Heshbon, and Og, king of Bashan, who reigned in Ashtaroth. So the elders and inhabitants of our land told us, 'Take provisions for your journey. Go and meet them and say to them, we are your servants. Please make a treaty with us. This bread of ours was warm when we packed it at home on the day we left to come to you. But take a look. It is now dry and moldy. These wineskins were new when we filled them, but look, they're cracked, and these clothes and sandals are worn out from our very long journey.' And then the men of Israel sampled their provisions, but did not seek the counsel of the Lord. And Yeshua made a treaty of peace with them and let them live. And the leaders of the congregation swore an oath to them. And 3 days after they made the treaty with the Gibeonites, the Israelites learned that they were their neighbors, living among them. So the Israelites set out, and on the third day arrived at their cities, Gibeon, Chephirath, Beeroth, and Kiriath Jearim. But the Israelites did not attack them, because their leaders of the congregation had sworn an oath to them by the Lord, the God of Israel. And the whole congregation grumbled against the leaders. And all the leaders answered, 'We have sworn an oath to them by the Lord, the God of Israel, and now we cannot touch them. This is how we will treat them. We will let them live so that no wrath will fall on us because of the oath we swore to them.' They continued, 'Let them live, but let them be woodcutters and water carriers for the whole congregation.' And so the leaders kept their promise." That is so merciful. That is so absolutely wonderful for them. Like they found it in their hearts to not destroy every single living, breathing thing that is there. Instead, you can now serve me for the rest of your life with no choice and no compensation. How's that? That sounds like a perfectly reasonable thing for some ex-slaves to do. And the Gibeonites answered, "Your servants were told clearly that the Lord your God has commanded his servant Moses to give you all the land and wipe out all its inhabitants before you. So we greatly feared for our lives because of you, and this is why we have done this. Now we are in your hands. Do to us whatever seems good and right to you." And so Yeshua did this and delivered them from the hands of the Israelites. And they did not kill the Gibeonites. On that day he made them woodcutters and water carriers, and they are, to this day, for the congregation of the Lord and for the altar at the place he would choose. And so that's where we're going to go ahead and wrap this one up. The former slave nation, who has now become a fighting force to be reckoned with, have shown mercy to others by allowing them to become their slaves. God has shown his absolute wisdom in his choice of who's leading them and his military decisions and his faithfulness in being diligent with the Lord. He is obviously the best choice to go forward. He is obviously inspired by God by what has happened here today. Like, there's obviously no one but God would tell somebody to lure out all the defensive men through a pact of honorable combat and then attack them from behind. Not them, though. The defenseless that they left behind. That's absolutely a valorous thing, and it is justified by birthright. It is. You should believe that. Hopefully, I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a very difficult topic. I understand that I hold unconventional beliefs. I understand that I step on toes with this. It is not intentional. I am not meaning to hurt your feelings. I am merely reading through this book and seeing what it says about itself, and it's pretty terrible. Like, it's pretty terrible to just sit down and think, and then we're supposed to say that this is the God that we're supposed to serve. I don't hold with that. And my God, the one who created all things, he does not condone this. There is no instance ever in which you are allowed to go in and attack innocent people. I said that, knowing full well what is going on. Both sides are doing wrong things in the current situation, but only one side appeared to be in this one. Like, this wasn't, we're going to reclaim our ancestral land. You have to very, very, very clearly understand this. This was, Abraham said that this land was promised to him. And he told his children that through the years. And then they decided to go in and take what was not theirs. The people who are dying in this story, the people who are being put an end to in this story, are living peacefully among themselves. We don't hear about fights among them. But we will hear about fights for the next couple of millennia. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pit State. Peace.